Imagine, during an African safari, my son threw me out of the Jeep in the middle of the wild savannah and sneered, "Goodbye, meet the lions." A heart-wrenching betrayal from my own flesh and blood, craving my inheritance. But when he returned to the hotel, thinking I was dead, I was already there and said, "I have a surprise for you." Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. 50,000, Dad, that's all I need. Trevor's fist slammed against my coffee table, making the crystal ashtray Emma bought 20 years ago jump an inch. I didn't flinch. The ice in my whiskey glass barely clinked as I took another measured sip, watching my 35-year-old son pace between the window and my worn leather chair like a caged animal. His expensive shirt hung untucked, wrinkled from whatever desperate scheme had brought him here on this Friday evening. Like the previous 20 ideas? I kept my voice level, the way I'd learned in Vietnam when keeping calm meant staying alive. "Trevor, you're a grown man." He whirled around, designer watch catching the last rays of Texas sunlight streaming through my ranch house windows. "Of course you say no. You always say no." The accusation hung in the air between us, mixing with the scent of leather furniture and the faint smell of motor oil from my garage. I'd been working on the '67 Mustang again, trying to forget another week of Trevor's phone calls, another week of hearing about his brilliant plans that always needed my money to succeed. "This is my money, not yours." I set my glass down deliberately, each word measured like the whiskey I'd poured. "Until you learn to earn it yourself." "Earn it?" Trevor's laugh was sharp, bitter. "You mean like washing cars for 40 years? Like getting my hands dirty with soap and water?" I studied his face, searching for any trace of the boy I'd raised alone after Emma died, the child who used to help me in the garage, who'd begged for bedtime stories about my adventures in the service. This stranger wearing my son's face had replaced him somewhere along the way. "Those car washes put you through college. They paid for your apartment, your failed restaurant, that photography business you abandoned after 6 months." My voice grew harder despite my efforts to stay calm. "Every scheme you've started, I've funded. Every failure, I've covered." Trevor stopped pacing. Something shifted in his expression, a calculation I'd seen before, but never quite this cold. "Well, maybe I won't need to ask much longer." The words hit me like ice water. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You're 62, Dad. Those car washes will be mine eventually anyway." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe I'll just wait." Silence stretched between us, heavy as the humid Texas air drifting through my open windows. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's dog barked, normal life continuing while my world shifted on its axis. I stood slowly, feeling every year of my age in my knees, in the ache of my back from bending over car hoods for decades. Trevor watched me rise, and for a moment, uncertainty flickered across his features. "Get out." The words came quietly, but they carried the weight of finality. Trevor opened his mouth, perhaps to argue, perhaps to take it back. Then he grabbed his jacket from where he'd thrown it over Emma's piano bench and headed for the door. "Dad, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." I walked to the mantel, running my fingers along the frame of Emma's photograph. "You meant every word." The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. Gravel crunched under his BMW's tires as he gunned the engine, the sound fading into the evening chorus of crickets and distant traffic. I stood there holding Emma's picture, her smile frozen in time from our wedding day 37 years ago, wishing she were here to tell me where I'd gone wrong with our son. The whiskey glass sat empty on the coffee table where Trevor had slammed his fist, a ring of condensation marking the wood Emma had polished every Saturday morning. I couldn't bring myself to clean it up, couldn't erase the evidence of what had just happened between us. 8:15 by the grandfather clock in the corner. Emma had wound that clock every Sunday after church, a ritual I'd maintained for the 12 years since her death, though I'd stopped attending services the day we buried her. I moved through the house like a ghost, switching lights on and off without purpose. In the kitchen, I made coffee at midnight because sleep wouldn't come. The familiar routine of measuring grounds, adding water, listening to the machine gurgle to life. These small actions kept my hands busy while my mind raced. The garage became my refuge, as it always did when the house felt too empty. I sat in the driver's seat of my restored '67 Mustang, breathing in the smell of leather and motor oil, running my hands over the steering wheel I'd wrapped myself. Emma used to joke that I loved these cars more than people, but she was wrong. I loved the certainty of mechanical problems, the way you could fix things with the right tools and enough patience. People were harder to repair. Trevor had been 10 when the cancer took Emma, old enough to understand death, but too young to process the magnitude of losing his mother. I'd tried to fill both roles, learning to braid hair for school pictures, sitting through piano recitals and soccer games, applauding twice as loud to make up for the empty seat beside me. Maybe that was my mistake, trying to be everything to him instead of teaching him to stand on his own. I remembered the extra shifts I'd worked, the vacations I'd skipped to pay for his college education, the nights I'd fallen asleep over account books, calculating how to afford his dreams. The photography studio that lasted 6 months, the restaurant that closed after a year, the app idea that never got past the concept stage. Each failure had cost me more than money. It had cost me pieces of hope I'd stored up for both of us. The bedroom felt cavernous when I finally climbed the stairs at 2 a.m. Emma's side of the bed remained undisturbed, the way I'd left it every day for 12 years. Sometimes I'd catch myself buying her favorite soap, or pausing at the grocery store when I saw the magazines she used to read. I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. Somewhere in Austin, Trevor was probably at his apartment, planning his next move, his next angle. He'd learned to see me as a bank account with emotions attached, a resource to be managed rather than a father to be loved. Emma would have known what to do. She'd always been better with people, better at reading the spaces between words. "Love him, but don't enable him," she'd whispered during one of our last conversations, before the morphine made talking too difficult. I'd failed at that balance, given him everything he'd asked for, hoping love could substitute for discipline, hoping generosity could build character. The alarm showed 6 a.m. when I finally dozed off, exhausted by the weight of 18 years of single parenting, of wondering if I'd loved my son too much or not enough. If the stranger who'd threatened me in my own living room was my creation or some cruel twist of genetics. Sunday passed in a blur of routine maintenance, checking on the car washes, reviewing schedules, anything to keep my hands busy and my mind off Friday night's conversation. Monday morning found me at the kitchen table with black coffee in the business section, trying to focus on stock prices when my phone rang. The phone's shrill ring cut through Monday morning, quiet like a blade. I glanced at the caller ID, my stomach tightening when I saw Trevor's name. 3 days of silence since our confrontation. 3 days of wondering if I'd lost my son completely. "Dad?" His voice sounded different, softer, uncertain, almost like the boy I remembered. I set down my coffee cup, choosing my words carefully. "Trevor, I need to apologize." The words came quickly as if rehearsed. "What I said Friday night, that was horrible. I was frustrated and angry, but that's no excuse." Something in his tone made me pause. Too perfect, too practiced. But underneath the careful delivery, I heard something that might have been genuine regret. "I've been thinking all weekend," he continued, "about Mom, about everything you sacrificed for me. You deserve better than what I said." I found myself softening, despite my wariness. "Son, listen, Dad, I know this might sound crazy after Friday, but something's come up. Remember my college friend Marcus, the investment banker?" I remembered Marcus, cocky kid who'd visited once during Trevor's junior year, treated my house like a hotel. He and his wife booked this safari in Tanzania for next month, but she just found out she's pregnant, high-risk pregnancy. Doctor says no international travel. Trevor's voice gained momentum, excitement bleeding through. "They can't get refunds on anything. Flights, accommodations, guide fees. Marcus offered me the whole package at cost." My pen had stopped moving across the morning crossword. "A safari?" "Serengeti National Park, Dad. The real deal. Professional guide, luxury accommodations, everything included." His enthusiasm sounded genuine now, boyish in a way I hadn't heard in years. "I know it sounds spontaneous, but I keep thinking about those nature documentaries you used to watch, how you'd talk about seeing Africa someday." I had talked about that, back when Emma was alive, and retirement seemed like a distant possibility rather than a lonely prospect. We'd planned to travel together, Scotland, Ireland, maybe a photo safari in Kenya. Cancer had stolen those dreams along with everything else. "The thing is," Trevor's voice dropped, becoming more intimate, "I've always wanted to see Africa with you. Father-son adventure, you know? After what happened Friday, I realized how much time I've wasted being angry instead of appreciating what I have. I stood up, walking to the kitchen window that overlooked my property. In the distance, traffic hummed along the highway, normal people heading to normal jobs, not wrestling with whether their sons had finally grown up or learned to manipulate more skillfully. When would this be? 2 weeks, April 20th through May 1st. He paused. I know it's short notice, but Marcus needs an answer today, or he'll offer it to someone else. 2 weeks. Enough time to arrange coverage for the car washes. Enough time to process what this invitation really meant. Either Trevor was genuinely trying to repair our relationship, or this was an elaborate setup for something I couldn't yet see. What would this cost? My practical side asserted itself. Nothing beyond our flights to Dar es Salaam. Everything else is covered. Park fees, accommodations, meals, even the internal flights. Trevor's words tumbled out faster now. Marcus already paid for everything. We just need to cover our international tickets. I pulled out my passport from the kitchen drawer, where I kept important documents, checking the expiration date. Still valid for 2 years. Emma had insisted we renew them together before she got sick, joking about all the places we'd visit when I finally retired. Dad, you still there? I'm thinking. I was doing more than thinking. I was hoping this was real, that the son I'd raised was still somewhere inside the man who'd threatened me 3 days ago. Send me the details, flight schedules, itinerary, everything. Really? The joy in Trevor's voice sounded completely authentic. Dad, this is going to be incredible. Just the two of us, seeing something amazing together. After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen, holding my passport and feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. The smart part of my brain whispered warnings, reminded me of Trevor's talent for manipulation, his ability to say exactly what I needed to hear. But the father's heart I'd guarded so carefully for 3 days cracked open just enough to let hope slip through. Tuesday blurred past in a whirlwind of preparations, packing safari clothes I'd never owned, arranging coverage for the car washes, updating my will just in case. By Wednesday morning at 5:30, Trevor and I stood at the Austin Bergstrom check-in counter, backpacks slung over our shoulders like the adventurers I'd always imagined we could be. First time to Tanzania? The airline clerk's smile was infectious as she processed our documents. You're in for quite an adventure. Trevor shifted beside me, fumbling with his boarding pass. Yeah, it should be unforgettable. I attributed his nervousness to travel anxiety. After all, this was his first major international trip too. The boy who'd once begged for bedtime stories about my Vietnam experiences was finally getting his own adventure story. Security moved quickly at that early hour. I watched Trevor check his carry-on 3 times, his movements sharp and focused in a way that reminded me of soldiers preparing for deployment. Excitement, I told myself. The same restless energy I'd felt before my first overseas assignment. Gate 37, I announced, checking our boarding passes as we cleared security. Amsterdam first, then Dar es Salaam. Trevor nodded, pulling out his phone to verify something, before remembering we'd soon be out of cell range for a week. Dad, I really appreciate you trusting me with this planning. Our 8:15 departure lifted us over Texas flatlands I'd known my entire life, carrying us toward horizons I'd only seen in documentaries. Through the window, farms gave way to forests, then to landscapes that looked increasingly foreign. I haven't been this excited about a trip since your mother and I went to Yellowstone, I confessed, watching clouds drift past our window. Trevor's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. This will be different, more primal. 9 hours to Amsterdam passed in discussions about African wildlife and shared memories of nature programs we'd watched together when he was young. I told him stories about jungle survival techniques from Vietnam, knowledge I'd never expected to share again. Remember when you wanted to be an explorer? I asked as flight attendants collected our lunch trays. Things change. His answer came too quickly, too flat. During our 3-hour Amsterdam layover, we browsed duty-free shops filled with European luxuries. I bought small gifts for my car wash employees, chocolates and postcards they'd probably never receive. Trevor purchased items from the outdoor gear section, studying each piece with the intensity of someone preparing for more than tourism. Safari equipment, he explained, when I asked about the heavy-duty rope and multi-purpose tool he'd selected. You never know what situations might come up in the wilderness. The overnight flight to Dar es Salaam carried us over landscapes that shifted from European cities to Mediterranean coastlines to African desert. I dozed fitfully, dreams mixing memories of Emma with images of lions and elephants I'd soon see in person. Trevor remained awake beside me, staring out the dark window, his jaw set in concentration. When I woke near dawn, he was checking his watch repeatedly, calculating something I couldn't decipher. "Almost there," he murmured as African sunrise painted the cabin windows gold. Below us, red earth stretched to impossible horizons, punctuated by baobab trees that looked like ancient sentinels. I pressed my face to the window like a child seeing snow for the first time, marveling at the vastness of a continent I'd only imagined. Immigration at Julius Nyerere International Airport moved slowly through lines of tourists and business travelers. The stamp in my passport felt like a seal on adventure, proof that Henry Walker had finally stepped beyond the familiar boundaries of Texas. Heat and humidity hit us like a physical force as we emerged from air conditioning into African air, thick with unfamiliar scents, spices, vegetation, wood smoke from cooking fires. Swahili conversations flowed around us, musical and incomprehensible. The domestic terminal shuttle was crowded with safari-bound tourists comparing itineraries and camera equipment. Trevor checked his watch again, confirming departure times with obsessive precision. 6 hours until we reach the Serengeti, he announced as we boarded our final flight. Through the small aircraft window, Tanzania's landscape unfolded below us. Endless savanna dotted with acacia trees, rivers that snake silver through grasslands, and scattered settlements that grew smaller and more isolated as we flew deeper into wilderness. The Serengeti airstrip was nothing more than a cleared patch of dirt surrounded by infinite grassland. As our small plane touched down, raising clouds of red dust, I felt civilization fall away behind us. Trevor and I stepped onto the tarmac into air that shimmered with heat and carried sounds I'd never heard. Bird calls unlike any North American species, the distant rumble of large animals moving through brush, wind through acacia thorns that created an almost musical whisper. A weathered Land Rover waited 50 meters away, its driver waving enthusiastically despite the scorching afternoon sun. "Welcome to Serengeti," he called in accented English. "I am Joseph. Lodge is 1 hour drive." During the bone-jarring ride over rutted dirt roads, the landscape revealed itself gradually. Zebra herds grazed in the distance, their stripes creating optical illusions against golden grass. Giraffes moved in slow motion between scattered trees, their heads swaying like metronomes. "First time Africa?" Joseph asked, navigating around a termite mound taller than our vehicle. "Absolutely." I couldn't contain my excitement, despite the dust coating my teeth and the heat making my clothes stick to my skin. "It's incredible." Trevor remained silent, studying the terrain with the focus of someone memorizing geography for later use. The safari lodge appeared like a mirage, elevated wooden platforms connected by walkways, overlooking a waterhole where elephants had gathered for their afternoon drink. Thatched roofs provided shade over open-air structures designed to capture any breeze brave enough to cross the savannah. "Bungalows 7 and 8, the desk clerk announced, handing us old-fashioned metal keys. "Dinner is served until 9, safety briefing tomorrow at 6 a.m. My room was spartanly furnished, but positioned perfectly to overlook the waterhole through glassless windows. Mesh screens kept insects out while allowing the sounds of African evening to flow through: hyena calls, bird conversations, the splash of elephants bathing. Trevor's bungalow was adjacent to mine, connected by a raised walkway. Through my window, I could see him unpacking with methodical efficiency, laying out equipment like a soldier preparing for deployment. Dinner was served communally under a massive baobab tree, tourists sharing stories of lion sightings and photography successes. I found myself energized by conversations with strangers, collecting advice about best viewing times and wildlife behavior patterns. Trevor picked at his food, responding to questions with monosyllables while checking his watch frequently. His distraction felt different from simple travel fatigue, more focused, more purposeful. "Early morning tomorrow," he said, as we walked back to our bungalows under stars brighter than any Texas sky. "Big day ahead." Sleep came slowly, despite my exhaustion. Lion roars echoed across the savannah throughout the night, primal sounds that bypassed my civilized brain and spoke directly to ancestral fears. This was wildness beyond anything I'd experienced, even in Vietnam's jungles. Dawn arrived with a chorus of bird calls and the gentle knock of staff delivering coffee to our doors. The safety briefing was scheduled for 6 a.m. in the lodge's main pavilion, where James Umwanga waited with maps and clipboards. James was perhaps 40, with the weathered confidence of someone who'd spent decades guiding tourists through situations that could turn deadly in seconds. His English was precise, his manner professional but warm. "Gentlemen, you have chosen solo safari without guide." He spread topographical maps across the wooden table, marking routes with different colored pencils. "This is serious responsibility." 7 different routes radiated from the lodge like spokes on a wheel, each marked with distance, difficulty level, and danger warnings. Routes 1 through 4 stayed within 50 kilometers of the lodge, with ranger checkpoints every 20 kilometers. Routes 5 and 6 ventured further into wilderness but maintained radio contact with base stations. Route 7 extended 300 kilometers into the most remote section of Serengeti, crossing into areas where no human settlement existed for vast distances. "Most visitors choose routes 1 through 4, James explained, his finger tracing the safer paths. "Rangers patrol these areas, radio contact maintained, medical evacuation possible." Trevor leaned forward, studying Route 7 with intense concentration. "What about this one, the long route?" James's expression grew serious. "Route 7 is for expert guides only, 300 kilometers through most dangerous territory, lions, elephants, buffalo, crocodiles at river crossings. No cell service, no rescue stations." "Sounds like a real adventure," I interjected, caught up in Trevor's enthusiasm. "We can handle it." "You must understand completely," James continued, his voice gaining authority. "This route passes through active hunting grounds of 3 different lion prides, elephant corridors where bulls become aggressive during must season, river crossings with crocodile populations." He pulled out photographs showing massive crocodiles basking on riverbanks, elephants with tusks that could impale a vehicle, lion prides resting in shade that could hide them until you were within striking distance. "The most remote point is 150 kilometers from any human settlement," James emphasized. "If something goes wrong, help cannot reach you quickly, maybe not at all." Trevor's eyes were bright with something that looked like excitement but felt different, more calculated. "Perfect, that's exactly what we want. Authentic African wilderness." I signed waiver after waiver, acknowledging dangers I'd never contemplated, releasing the lodge from liability for death or injury resulting from our choices. My attorney's contact information went on emergency forms I hoped would never be needed. The vehicle inspection revealed a modified Toyota Land Cruiser equipped for serious wilderness travel, reinforced suspension, steel brush guards, extra fuel tanks, emergency supplies including first aid kit, tools, spare tires, water containers, and satellite radio for emergencies. "Radio checks every 50 kilometers, James instructed, demonstrating the communication equipment. "If you miss 2 consecutive checks, we assume emergency and begin search procedures." Trevor insisted on driving, claiming 4-wheel drive experience from Texas ranch work. His familiarity with the controls seemed genuine as he adjusted mirrors and tested the radio system. "Departure 6 a.m., James confirmed as we completed paperwork. "Route 7 typically requires 2 to 3 days for complete circuit. You have camping equipment, food supplies, emergency beacon." That evening, I fell asleep to the sound of lions calling across the darkness, imagining the adventure awaiting us at dawn. Trevor's light remained on late into the night, visible through the thin walls between our bungalows. 5:30 a.m. came with gentle knocking from lodge staff delivering coffee and confirming our early departure. African dawn painted the sky in stages, deep blue yielding to purple, then orange, finally gold as the sun cleared the horizon. Trevor appeared at my door precisely at 6, dressed in khaki safari clothes and carrying a day pack that seemed heavier than necessary for our planned route. His movements were efficient, almost military in their precision. "Ready for the adventure of a lifetime?" he asked, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Lodge staff had loaded our vehicle with supplies during the night: food, water, camping gear, emergency equipment. James performed a final inspection, checking fluid levels and tire pressure with the thoroughness of someone who understood that mechanical failure in the wilderness could mean death. "Remember," he said, shaking both our hands, "radio check every 50 kilometers. Miss 2 consecutive checks, and we come looking." Trevor nodded impatiently, already climbing into the driver's seat. "We understand the risks." The main gate of the lodge opened onto a dirt track that would be our highway for the next 3 days. As Trevor engaged four-wheel drive and we rolled forward, I felt the last connection to safety and civilization fall away behind us. Early morning air was cool, carrying scents of grass and earth, and something wild I couldn't identify. Through open windows, sounds of awakening Savannah created a symphony: bird calls, insect buzzing, distant animal movement through brush. "Look at those zebras!" I called out, pointing to a herd grazing 200 meters from our track. "Can we stop for photos?" Trevor slowed reluctantly, allowing me to capture images of animals completely unafraid of our vehicle. Their stripes created optical illusions in morning light, individual animals disappearing and reappearing as they moved through herd formations. For the first hour, we encountered other safari vehicles occasionally, guided tours starting their morning game drives. Tourists waved from open-topped Land Rovers, cameras and binoculars reflecting sunlight as they documented their own African adventures. By 7:30, the frequency of other vehicles decreased noticeably. Our track became rougher, less defined, requiring Trevor's full attention to navigate between rocks and ruts that could damage suspension or puncture tires. "Getting to the good stuff now," Trevor commented, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. An elephant family appeared at 8:30, blocking our progress completely. The matriarch was massive, easily 4 tons of muscle and bone, with tusks that could flip our vehicle if she decided we represented a threat to her calves. "In Vietnam, we never saw anything like this," I whispered, afraid to speak loudly enough to attract attention. Trevor sat motionless, engine idling, calculating something behind his eyes. The elephants moved with deliberate grace, mothers positioning themselves between our vehicle and their young, demonstrating protective instincts that had evolved over millions of years. After 20 minutes, the herd moved on, leaving only footprints the size of dinner plates and the memory of intelligence in ancient eyes that had evaluated us and found us wanting. "How much further to the halfway point?" I asked as we resumed driving. "About 2 hours," Trevor replied, checking his GPS obsessively. "The most remote section." 9:15 brought our first lion tracks. Massive paw prints in soft earth beside our route, so fresh they still showed claw-mark details. My excitement mixed with the first real understanding of what we'd committed ourselves to. "Fresh tracks," Trevor observed, pointing them out with what sounded like enthusiasm, but felt different, more anticipatory. The landscape was changing as we drove deeper into wilderness. Scattered acacia trees gave way to denser vegetation, providing more cover for predators but less visibility for prey animals like ourselves. By 10 a.m., we hadn't seen another human vehicle for 90 minutes. Our GPS showed the nearest road was 80 kilometers away, further than many people drove to work in civilization. "We're really in the middle of nowhere," I marveled, taking photos of endless savanna stretching to horizons that seemed impossibly distant. Trevor's responses were becoming shorter, more mechanical. His foot was heavy on the accelerator, pushing our speed higher than seemed safe on uncertain terrain. The radio crackled with our first checkpoint call at 10:30. "Safari Lodge, this is Vehicle 7, checking in at 50 kilometers. Vehicle 7, Safari Lodge confirms. All well?" "All well," Trevor responded, his voice steady. Proceeding to next checkpoint. 11 a.m. brought complete cell phone signal loss and terrain that grew increasingly desolate. No vehicle tracks were visible behind us anymore. Our own tire marks had been erased by wind and the passage of animals. Temperature was rising steadily. Cool morning air gave way to heat that made the landscape shimmer and turned our vehicle into a mobile oven despite open windows. 11:30 found us approaching what James had described as the most remote section of Route 7, an area where rescue would be impossible and survival would depend entirely on our own resources and judgment. Trevor checked his watch again. 11:45. "Getting hot," I commented, wiping sweat from my forehead with a bandana that was already soaked. Trevor's hands tightened on the steering wheel, as we approached a particularly desolate stretch of Savannah, where the tracks seemed to disappear entirely into wilderness that stretched endlessly in all directions. "Almost there," he murmured, and something in his voice made me glance at his profile. For just a moment, in the harsh light and heat of African noon, my son looked like a complete stranger. Brakes screamed against metal. Dust exploded around our vehicle as Trevor slammed us to a sudden stop, throwing me forward against the dashboard. "What the—" I started, wiping grit from my eyes. Trevor sat motionless, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning, and something in his posture made my stomach clench with the first whisper of real fear. "Why are we stopping here?" I asked, squinting through the windshield at endless acacia scrubland stretching to every horizon. No landmarks, no shade, no signs of life, except vultures circling overhead like aerial undertakers. Trevor turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before, a coldness that made my breath catch. "You know, Dad, you were right about something." "What's that, son?" I wiped sweat from my forehead with my bandana, confusion mixing with growing unease. "These are your car washes, not mine." His voice was mechanical, rehearsed. "Your money, your rules, your control over everything I do." "Trevor, what do you mean?" My camera hung heavy around my neck, forgotten now, as alarm bells started ringing in my head. "We're having a good time, aren't we?" "But you know what I realized?" He reached across me suddenly, his hand grasping for the passenger door handle. "I'm tired of waiting for you to die naturally." The words hit me like physical blows. "Son, what's gotten into you? You're scaring me. I just want to speed up my inheritance timeline." The door clicked open, letting scorching African air rush into our climate-controlled sanctuary. The temperature difference was like opening an oven. My mind reeled, trying to process what was happening. "You're what? Trevor, stop this nonsense and let's—" "Goodbye, Dad." His voice had turned to ice. "Time to meet the lions." Everything happened in seconds that felt like hours. Trevor's hands, my son's hands that I'd taught to tie shoes and throw baseballs, shoved me hard toward the open door. I grabbed at the door frame, my camera strap catching, but his strength surprised me. "Trevor, no! What are you doing?" I hit the rocky ground hard, pain shooting through my ribs as stones bit into my palms. Dust filled my mouth and eyes, the taste of Africa mixing with the metallic flavor of shock and betrayal. The engine was already running. Trevor slammed the door shut without looking at me, without a word of explanation or goodbye. Tires spun, spraying me with dirt and gravel as the Land Cruiser accelerated away. "Trevor, come back!" I shouted to the rapidly disappearing dust cloud, my voice cracking with disbelief. The sound of the engine faded quickly in the vast silence of the Serengeti. Within moments, I could no longer see the vehicle, only a settling cloud of red dust that marked my son's path back towards civilization, and away from his father, whom he'd just condemned to death. I sat in the dirt, bleeding from scraped palms, my broken camera hanging uselessly around my neck. Flies had already found me, drawn by the salt of my sweat and the scent of my fear. The temperature was over 100 degrees. I had perhaps a quarter bottle of water left, no shelter, no navigation equipment, and no way to call for help. Lions had marked this territory. I'd seen their tracks myself just hours ago. My son had just tried to murder me. The reality of it settled over me like the African heat, crushing and inescapable. Trevor had planned this from the beginning. The safari invitation, the reconciliation, the careful selection of the most remote route, all of it had been calculated to bring me here, to this moment, to die alone in the wilderness while he inherited everything I'd worked 40 years to build. Vultures wheeled overhead, patient and knowing. I forced myself to stand, brushing dust from my clothes with hands that trembled despite the heat. Somewhere in the distance, a hyena laughed, the same sound that would echo over my bones if I didn't figure out how to survive the next few hours. The sun beat down mercilessly as I studied the landscape, looking for any sign of water, shelter, or hope. Standing in that desolate stretch of African wilderness, I felt something shift inside me, something that hadn't stirred since Vietnam, when survival meant the difference between coming home to Emma or dying in a jungle halfway around the world. The shock was wearing off, replaced by cold calculation. Trevor had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated what 40 years of military training could do when a man's life depended on it. I checked my watch. 2:15 p.m. The sun was past its peak but still brutal, probably 104 degrees in the shade, if I could find any. Sunset would come around 7, giving me less than 5 hours of usable daylight. My inventory was pathetic. Quarter bottle of water, pocket knife, bandana, broken camera, and the clothes on my back. But I had something Trevor didn't know about. 20-year-old survival training that had kept me alive in worse conditions than this. First rule, conserve energy and water. I wrapped the bandana around my head, protecting my neck from the sun, and took one small sip of water. Rationing would be critical. Second rule, find the animals, find water. Elephants never strayed far from water sources, and their tracks were unmistakable in the soft earth. I found a set of massive footprints heading southeast, away from Trevor's route. The animal trail led through scattered acacia trees, providing occasional patches of shade that felt like salvation. I walked steadily, but not quickly, conserving energy while covering ground. Every 30 minutes, I allowed myself another tiny sip of water. My mind worked as I walked, processing what had happened with the clarity that comes from accepting that your child tried to kill you. The careful planning, the false reconciliation, the selection of Route 7. Trevor had researched everything. He'd chosen predators as his murder weapon, counting on them to hide his crime. By 3:45, I'd been walking for 90 minutes when I heard it. The distant rumble of an engine. Not Trevor returning. This sound came from the northeast, cutting across the elephant trail I'd been following. I changed direction immediately, crashing through thorn bushes that tore at my clothes and skin. The engine sound grew louder, definitely heading my way. When I emerged onto a secondary safari track, a safari vehicle was approaching through the dust, a proper tour group with an experienced guide. I stepped into the road, waving my arms like a castaway signaling a rescue ship. The Land Rover stopped immediately. The driver was African, perhaps 45, with the calm competence of a professional guide. 3 tourists stared at me from the back seats, an older couple and a young man with expensive camera equipment. "Sir, where is your vehicle?" the guide asked, quickly assessing my condition. "Are you injured?" "My son," I began, then stopped. "How do you explain that your own child just tried to murder you?" "He left me here. We were on Route 7, and he drove away." The guide's expression darkened. 20 years in the Serengeti had probably shown him every kind of human stupidity, but abandoning family in predator territory was a new low. "Quickly, get in," he said, already reaching for his radio. "We must get you to safety immediately." The older woman, Canadian from her accent, pressed a water bottle into my hands. "Oh my goodness, that's horrible. What kind of person abandons their father?" I drank carefully, fighting the urge to drain the entire bottle. The kind who wants his inheritance faster than nature intended. The guide introduced himself as Joseph Mbali as he turned the vehicle toward what he called a maintenance shortcut. He'd been guiding safaris for 2 decades and knew every track, every seasonal road, every ranger station in a 100-kilometer radius. "This route will take 2 hours, he explained, consulting a GPS unit that showed detailed topography. Much faster than main tourist roads. The young photographer wanted to know if he should call police. The Canadian couple shared energy bars and offered basic first aid for my scrapes and cuts. Normal people doing normal, decent things. Such a contrast to my own son that it made my throat tight with emotions I couldn't afford right now. Joseph maintained steady radio contact with Safari Lodge, reporting my rescue and requesting police presence for when we arrived. He asked careful questions about Trevor's vehicle, route, and timeline, building a case file in his head with professional efficiency. "Your son, he will return to Lodge tonight?" Joseph asked. "If he follows Route 7 completely, probably around 8 or 9 p.m. I checked my watch. 5 o'clock. "He doesn't know about your shortcut, does he?" Joseph's smile was grim. "Tourist maps do not show maintenance roads. He will take standard route, much longer." Which meant I'd arrive at the lodge hours before Trevor, giving me time to prepare for what would happen next. Time to decide whether my son would face justice for attempted murder or something more personal. As the Safari Lodge's distinctive architecture appeared through the acacia trees, I realized I felt different than I had that morning. The man who'd been pushed from that vehicle to die was gone. What remained was someone Trevor had never met, someone who'd survived worse than this, and had no intention of forgiving what couldn't be forgiven. The safari lodge erupted in controlled chaos when Joseph's vehicle pulled up to the main pavilion. James Mwanga, the manager who'd briefed us that morning, took one look at my dust-covered, scraped condition and immediately began coordinating medical attention and police contact. "Mr. Walker, what happened? Where is your son?" I accepted a clean towel and cold water, letting the relief of safety wash over me before answering. "Trevor abandoned me in the wilderness, deliberately. He intended for me to die out there." The gravity of my words settled over the gathered staff like a heavy blanket. In 20 years of safari operations, they'd seen tourist stupidity, mechanical failures, animal attacks, but premeditated murder was something new. "We must contact police immediately," James declared, already reaching for his radio. "This is attempted murder." Within 30 minutes, Inspector David Kimani arrived from the regional police station 40 kilometers away. He was a serious man in his 50s, accustomed to dealing with tourist incidents, but clearly recognizing this situation as something far more grave. "Mr. Walker, these are very serious accusations," Inspector Kimani began, settling into a chair across from me in the lodge's private office. "Please tell me exactly what happened, from the beginning." I recounted everything with military precision: the planned route, Trevor's behavior during the drive, the sudden stop, his words about speeding up his inheritance, the physical assault, the abandonment. The inspector took detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification about timing, location, and Trevor's exact statements. "You are certain this was intentional attempt to cause your death?" He told me it was time to meet the lions. He chose Route 7 specifically because it was the most dangerous, most isolated option available. I pulled out the torn sleeve of my shirt, evidence of my struggle. "Inspector, my son researched this carefully. He wanted those animals to eliminate the evidence of what he'd done." The inspector photographed my injuries, documented my dehydrated condition, and took statements from Joseph and the rescue tourists. Everything was being prepared for a formal case file that could support murder charges. "When do you expect your son to return?" Inspector Kimani asked. I checked my watch, 6:30 p.m. "Within the next 2 hours, if he completes the full route. He doesn't know I've been rescued." "Good. We will be ready for him." The next 2 hours passed in careful preparation. I showered, changed into clean clothes, and ate a proper meal, while Inspector Kimani positioned his officers discreetly around the lodge. Other guests were quietly informed that a security situation was developing, without specific details that might cause panic. I sat in my room, looking out over the same waterhole where elephants had gathered that morning, when I'd still believed my son loved me. Now I understood that Trevor saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to his inheritance, an obstacle he'd been willing to murder to remove. My hands were steady as I combed my hair and straightened my shirt. The terror and shock had been replaced by something colder, more calculating. Trevor would return expecting to find my body being consumed by scavengers. Instead, he'd find police officers and a very much alive father who'd survived his murder attempt. At 7:50 p.m., vehicle headlights swept across the lodge's main entrance. I moved to my window and watched Trevor's Land Cruiser pull into the parking area, dust settling around it like a shroud. Through the windshield, I could see Trevor checking his watch, probably calculating whether enough time had passed for the local predators to do their work. He climbed out of the vehicle casually, even whistling softly as he walked toward the main building. He expected to play the role of concerned son, arriving back from safari to discover his father mysteriously missing. He'd probably planned his performance, the growing worry, the frantic search, the eventual conclusion that Henry Walker had suffered some tragic accident in the African wilderness. Inspector Kimani's voice crackled softly on the radio, positioned on my bedside table. "All units, suspect has arrived. Move to positions." I stood up, adjusting my collar one final time. In a few minutes, I'd face the son who'd tried to kill me, the son who'd looked me in the eyes and condemned me to death for the crime of controlling my own money. Trevor was about to learn that some prey fights back. The sound of Trevor's engine shutting off echoed across the evening stillness, like a funeral bell. Through my window, I watched him climb out of the Land Cruiser, stretching his back with the casual satisfaction of someone who believed he'd successfully committed murder. He whistled softly as he walked toward the lodge entrance, probably mentally rehearsing the concerned son routine he'd planned to perform. The staff in the lobby watched him approach with barely concealed tension. They knew what was waiting upstairs. I remained seated in my chair, phone in hand, displaying the document that would destroy his world. Behind the door, Inspector Kamani and Sergeant Mwangi waited in silence, handcuffs ready. Trevor's footsteps echoed in the hallway, growing closer. I heard him fumble briefly with his key before sliding it into the lock. The metallic click seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. "Dad," he called softly as the door swung open, voice pitched to sound worried. "You here?" Trevor stepped into the room and froze. His confident smile died instantly as his eyes met mine, sitting calmly in the chair he'd expected to find empty. The backpack slipped from his fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud. "Hello, Trevor." My voice was steady, controlled. "I have a surprise for you." His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. He backed against the doorframe, unable to process what he was seeing. How are you here?" The police officer stepped out from behind the door, and Trevor's head whipped between them and me, panic replacing confusion in his eyes. "Take a look at this screen, son." I held up my phone, the legal document clearly visible. It's a copy of my new will. Trevor's eyes focused on the screen, squinting to read the text. I watched his face change as the words registered. Every asset, every car wash, every penny of his expected inheritance now designated for the African Wildlife Conservation Fund. "This isn't possible." His voice cracked. "You were supposed to be dead," I finished calmly. "Everything you were hoping to inherit? It's all going to charity now. The car washes, the house, every penny, donated to wildlife conservation." "What charity?" The words came out as a desperate whisper. "You can't do this to me." Inspector Kamani stepped forward, voice professionally firm. "Trevor Walker, you're under arrest for attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court." Trevor's back hit the wall as the reality crashed over him. "This is some kind of trick. Dad, whatever you think happened out there, I know exactly what happened." I stood slowly facing the son who'd condemned me to death. "You told me it was time to meet the lions." Your exact words. "We can work this out." His voice rose to near hysteria. "I can explain everything. You don't understand what really happened." But his eyes kept returning to my phone screen, to the legal document that had just destroyed his future. I could see him calculating, realizing that even if he'd succeeded in killing me, he would have inherited nothing. Trevor lunged forward suddenly, desperation overriding reason. "You set me up. This was all planned." The police officers moved quickly, restraining him before he could reach me. Inspector Kamani produced handcuffs while Sergeant Mwangi held Trevor's arms. "When?" Trevor's voice broke completely now, no longer the confident man who'd driven away from my planned deathbed. "When did you change it?" I paused, letting the question hang in the air. Outside, the African night was falling, bringing with it the sounds of the wilderness where Trevor had intended my story to end. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Trevor stood there breathing heavily, sweat mixing with dust on his face, waiting for an answer that would destroy him completely. I set my phone down carefully and looked directly into his eyes that held Emma's shape but none of her warmth. "After you stormed out last Friday night, something felt wrong." My voice was measured, deliberate. "You said I'd always say no, but then you mentioned being a wonderful new owner when I was gone." Trevor's face went pale as the timeline began forming in his mind. That phrase kept echoing in my head all weekend. The way you said it, like you were already planning my funeral. I paused, watching understanding dawn in his expression. "Monday morning, before you even called about Africa, I drove to my lawyer." "You mean before the trip?" His voice was barely a whisper. "James Patterson has the original documents locked in his safe, dated and witnessed last Monday at 10 a.m. I let that sink in. "Before you ever mentioned safari, before you planned this?" Trevor slumped against the wall, his legs giving out. "Everything I did, it was already pointless. When you called with the Africa invitation, it felt too convenient. A father knows when his child is lying, Trevor." I remained standing, watching him crumble. I didn't want to believe my own son could murder me, but I had to be careful. Inspector Kamani spoke up, consulting his notes. "We have witness statements from your rescue party. They confirm you deliberately abandoned him in predator territory." "I was coming back for you," Trevor's voice cracked with desperation. "I just got lost. The vehicle broke down." "Your exact words were recorded," the inspector continued. "Time to meet the lions. Multiple witnesses heard you say this. Trevor's face collapsed into his hands. This can't be happening. This can't be real. Do you know what it's like to realize your child wants you dead? The pain I'd been holding back finally broke through my composure. I raised you alone after your mother died. Everything I built was for you, and you threw it away for money. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Trevor looked up, tears streaming down his face. Everyone expects me to be like you. I just wanted what was mine. What was yours? My voice hardened again. You never earned a penny of what I built. Every scheme you started I funded. Every failure I covered. The inspector moved closer with the handcuffs. Trevor Walker, place your hands behind your back. Dad, please! Trevor's voice broke completely. We can fix this. Cancel the will. Give me another chance. But as the handcuffs clicked into place, I was already shaking my head. Emma would be heartbroken to see what you've become. I failed as a father, but I won't let you destroy what we built. The inspector read additional charges. Conspiracy, endangerment, attempted homicide. You'll be extradited to Tanzania for trial. Trevor's last desperate plea echoed in the room. I'm your only son. No, I said quietly, watching the police lead him toward the door. My son died in that desert when he chose murder over love. The door closed behind them, leaving me alone with the sound of handcuffs and the distant roar of lions. The same lions that were supposed to have covered Trevor's crime. Silence filled the room like water flooding a sinking ship. The sound of the police vehicle driving away carried my son toward a future of concrete walls and metal bars, taking with it the last remnants of the family I'd tried so hard to preserve. I sat back down in the chair, suddenly feeling every one of my 62 years. Justice had been served, but it tasted like ash in my mouth. There was no victory in watching your child destroy himself, no satisfaction in being right about something so fundamentally wrong. My phone buzzed with a call from James Patterson, my attorney back in Austin. Henry, I heard there was some kind of incident in Africa. Are you safe? I'm alive, James. The will stands exactly as written. My voice was steady despite the exhaustion creeping in. No changes, no exceptions. Trevor made his choice. The police contacted me about pressing charges. Are you certain you want to proceed? I looked out the window at the African Savannah, where elephants moved peacefully in the fading light, the same landscape Trevor had chosen as my graveyard. Press charges fully, no family privilege. He needs to face consequences for what he's done. After hanging up, I called the manager of my car washes. I'll be back Tuesday. Handle everything until then. There may be some news coverage about Trevor, but no comments to press. The practical arrangements felt surreal after everything that had happened. Tomorrow I'd change my flight, return to Texas, and begin the process of living without family. The house would feel different now, not just empty because Emma was gone, but hollow because Trevor had poisoned even the memories we'd made there. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. James Mwanga, the lodge manager, peered in cautiously. Sir, is there anything you need tonight? Tomorrow we arrange your flight home. Your staff's kindness has been remarkable, I told him honestly. The guides who saved me, please ensure they're rewarded. This place will always hold special meaning now. He nodded and withdrew, leaving me alone with the African night. Through the open window, I could hear the sounds that had terrified tourists for generations. Lions roaring in the distance, hyenas laughing their mad laughter, the rustling of creatures that killed to survive, not for inheritance. I pulled out my wallet and found the photo I always carried, Trevor at age 8, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a drawing of lions and elephants he'd made after watching a nature documentary. When I grow up, I want to explore Africa with you, Dad, he'd said. That little boy had grown up to use Africa as a murder weapon. I placed the photo on the bedside table and began packing Trevor's abandoned belongings, his expensive safari gear, the rope and tools he'd bought in Amsterdam for purposes I now understood, the camera he'd used to document our trip to the place he'd planned to kill me. Everything would be donated to the conservation fund, along with my estate. Let something good come from this betrayal. As I prepared for bed, I thought about Emma and what she would say about the choices I'd made. She'd always believed in second chances, in the power of love to redeem even the worst behavior. But Emma had died before seeing what Trevor would become. Maybe that was a mercy. I lay down but didn't expect sleep to come easily. Outside, the lions were roaring again, the same roars Trevor had intended to be my death song. Now they were simply part of this beautiful, dangerous world where survival meant everything and family meant nothing if it came at the cost of conscience. Tomorrow I'd return to Texas and start over. There would be no family dinners, no Christmas mornings, no one to inherit the business I'd spent 40 years building. But there would also be no more manipulation, no more watching my son destroy himself with greed, no more wondering when love would finally fail completely. I close my eyes and listen to Africa sing its ancient song of predator and prey, of survival and death, of the harsh justice that governed everything under these endless stars. In the darkness, I finally smiled. The lions hadn't gotten me after all. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.